Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Raptor Queens Podcast, the first ever all-women podcast covering the Toronto Raptors. My name is Sarah Khalil, and I am here with my other queens of the North, Essie Magic, Sonali Sharma, and Jade Hoops. And we are thrilled to have you all back here for yet another week of NBA lockdown. That's not the thrilling part, but talking about Raptors and just being engaged with this team that we love. At least we get to do that once a week with all of you fans. And thank you so much for tuning in. So this week we've got a couple different topics. First, we're going to talk about Marc versus Serge. Who would you keep? Not necessarily who's better, but maybe that's part of the conversation. We're going to dive into that, do a deep dive. We've got some tea time, what's going on with our Raptors, what's going on with Nick Nurse, what's going on with Serge. We've also got some commentary about Kawhi's intellectual property lawsuit. If you don't know about that, don't worry, we'll dive into that as well. And then we're going to go around the league and we're going to talk about the MJ documentary, The Last Dance. First 2 episodes dropped last week. What do we all think? And then there's this ongoing saga, Draymond versus KD. So we'll get into that as well. So as a starting point, like I mentioned, we're going to do a little bit deep dive into the Raptors centers, Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka. Have had outstanding seasons. Marc has been injured quite a lot this year, though, and that's been too bad. And both of their contracts are up for renegotiation, let's say, in the summer. So we're going to go around. We're actually going to start with Essie. I'd like to hear your take on this. Why don't you just kind of walk us through your thoughts? What do you think about who you would keep and why?
Sure. So, I know we've talked about this lightly in some other episodes, and some people probably already know my take, but I am 100% on the keep Serge and let Marc go unless he takes a super low contract train, if that makes sense. I just think that when you look at how they've both played, one player is on the decline, the other one is having one of the best careers, if not the best seasons of his career. And I know we talk a lot about what Marc brings in terms of playmaking, but I feel like there was a certain threshold that stats start to outweigh that. And that's what we've seen with Serge. He's averaging the most points he's ever averaged in his career. He's still averaging a lot of rebounds. And the two of them, when they've played, because there's been a lot of injuries this season, average around the same amount of minutes. His field goal percentage is, I believe, 51%, whereas like Marc is having the lowest field goal percentage of his career, 41%. Even his free throw shooting is down, which is something that's it's always weird when you see changes and things like that. That just kind of shows the decline in the player overall. And then he's also injury prone. We've seen him just suddenly, like, nobody hits him at all, and he's grabbing his hamstring. So that to me is showing a deterioration. And if we're going to invest in a player to give us a little bit more longevity, I think Serge is the way to go. And he's just also shown himself as a really good leader for the team. I just see him as more the future and Marc as the past.
Wow. Okay. I noticed I'm having an emotional reaction to that, where I just am feeling so bad for how you kind of cut down Marc Gasol. And I know that, well, actually, no, that's how it feels. It feels like a cut down.
Was I a bit harsh?
Well, I feel like there was like maybe an absence of acknowledgement of what he brings that maybe Serge doesn't. And I'm not necessarily saying I would keep Marc over Serge, and I know that money is a big thing, and how much can you get out of your player, and just in terms of like the long term 2-3 years, how many years of a contract can you get out of somebody, right? And yes, Marc is older, but I'm just gonna jump in on this, I guess. I don't think there's any center in the league who's smarter than him defensively. I just think he's one of the most intelligent defensive players. And when he's on the floor, the way that the entire Raptors team almost can kind of like relax, the way he can cover on mistakes defensively, I think he brings something really unique and different just because he's so intelligent. And then I also wonder how much recency bias is playing into this, just because we haven't seen him play a lot this year. And yes, that goes to your point about injury and maybe that's a deterioration. But also maybe he's just had an injured year and that happens. And I don't necessarily think that means that I don't know if that means he's washed up and this is the end of his good years.
So to your recency bias point, that is completely false. And you want me to tell you why? Because I've been saying Serge should stay the whole year. So there's even the beginning of the season, you guys know, I was always like Serge. So definitely no recency bias there, but it does work in my favor that Serge is playing the best basketball he's ever played right now. So, or at least second best season he's ever played. So, and in terms of acknowledgement of what he's done, definitely for sure, he's had his moments with us where he, I still love how he throws those outlet passes. His communication on defense is top notch. But the question was, you said, who do we keep at the end of the year? So I answered the question.
All right. I would like to hear Jade weigh in on this. Jade, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm with Essie, and that comes with a bit of my own bias because JV is my all-time favorite Raptor. So when he got traded for Marc Gasol in the first place, I had a terrible day. I was so upset. And he was just about to finally come back from being injured. He was supposed to play that night. And I saw the announcement. I was so excited. And it was like 2 hours later, JV's been traded. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? But even at the time, I remember my dad asked me, do you think this was a good trade? And I was not sold, mostly because of Marc's age. And right from there, and I was like, 2 to 3 years, that's all he's got. That was all he had left when he came to the team. Serge is playing incredible basketball. And he's just got more years in the tank left than Marc does. That's like Marc's 34 years old, I think. So, I mean, by any standard, he's up there for basketball.
Okay, Sonali, what do you think? I mean, it sounds like Jade maybe has a little bit of a personal thing going on because of her love for JV. So there might be some other factors in play. But Sonali, I'd love to hear your take.
I mean, I know, Sarah, you're going to be a little disappointed, but I'm on the Essie train as well here, too. I have to say that in my sort of analysis too, I was pretty harsh. I mean, Marc is the older player. He's had more miles. It just makes more practical sense to keep Serge. And to your point, Sarah, I would like an homage to Marc to thank him for what he did in the 2019 championship against Golden State Warriors, and also what he did to Joel Embiid. And Serge is an elite defender. I mean, from a business standpoint, we've really leaned on him. He's had one of the best seasons, if not the best season of his 11-year career. And he's a big reason why we've been staying afloat. And, we've been an injury-ridden team. And this is maybe where my recency bias comes in. I'll admit to that. But watching him in that Indiana Pacers game, and he had 30 points in that game when we had the 15-game winning streak. He's a guy that's going to stay. And I don't know if you guys saw him. He was on I forget whose live channel he was on Instagram. But basically, he just loves Toronto so much. And anybody that loves Toronto that much deserves to stay on the team.
Sarah, looks like the train is leaving you at the station. Bye.
I know y'all are laughing at me, but I'm going to take this from a different approach for just a second here. First of all, I know that I asked the question, who are we going to keep, which means we have to get into the realities of contracts and money and all that good stuff. But if we're just talking a sheer, if we were to take all that away, and I get that that's kind of unrealistic, and we were just looking at their individual strengths and what they bring and who's a better fit with the Raptors' style of play, etc. I think that there's at least an argument to be made for Marc Gasol because this is first and foremost a defensive-minded team, 100%. And I don't know. I don't know how you can argue that there's that Marc is I don't think you could say that Serge is smarter defensively than Marc. I think he's really a hard worker defensively, and I think he's intelligent. I just think Marc has a defensive IQ that is probably one of the best in the league. And I don't know if you can like train that. Perhaps you can. Maybe Serge can like learn that. I actually don't know the answer. But if it's not a learnable skill and it's just something that's intuitive, Marc has it in spades. And I think that's really hard to replicate. And then the second thing is on the on the offensive side of things, we know the Raptors are also a really good fast break team, and Marc is very good at initiating the fast break. So on those 2 points, when we just look at what they bring, and then Essie, what you were saying, that they kind of average the same amount of rebounds. So if they're all bringing the same amount of rebounds, but Marc is also bringing that defensive intelligence, then, okay, hold on, what were you going to say? Go, Essie.
Said they're averaging, when they do play, they average same amount of minutes per game per season. Not rebounds. Yeah. Serge is better at rebounds.
By how much?
By about 2. Serge is 8 point something. Marc is 6.3.
Okay. All right. So we got a 2 rebound differential here. Now, it's true that the Raptors are generally not a wonderful rebounding team, at least this year. So maybe you want those extra 2 rebounds from Serge. But I also still think that we may just forget how good Marc is because we haven't got to see him play that much this year. And he just actually is such an outstandingly good player. And the Raptors are awesome when he's on the floor. So I don't know. I don't think you should write off Marc quite so easily. That's all.
Okay.
I will say about Marc, like Essie mentioned, that unless he takes a friendly contract, he might do that to stick around for another year. I think he's the kind of guy that's a possibility. So maybe we won't have to pick.
I don't know. I don't see him doing that because it's kind of like why Danny Green left. You know what I mean? Because when you're at the later years of your career, you need to lock in as much last minute money as you can get. You know what I mean?
But he gave up money to come in the first place.
No, not to my knowledge.
Yeah, he there was a clause in his contract. I would have to research it to get the exact details, but he did end up taking less money than was on the table for him available when he came to Toronto.
But he was traded to Toronto, right?
Yeah, but there's something in his contract. I remember very specifically reading it. I would have to go back and research it because it's been a while. But he did leave some money on the table.
Even still, though, he made $26 million this past season. And when he decides to opt in, because he could have opted out, it's going to be very difficult to go from 26 million to, because keep in mind, we have to resign Fred, right? And Fred's going to command 20 million a year. So the drop off from 26 million to whatever the Raptors can offer him, which would be under, if they're keeping Serge, which would be under 10 million, that is going to be, I don't know, man. If I was him, I wouldn't do it. I have a wife and kids. Like, that's the way he's thinking about his family, his future. Like, I don't think as great as Toronto is, the only thing, and I will say one thing that works in our favor is the fact, which is unfortunate though, is the fact that the coronavirus situation is making contracts, seem less guaranteed because of the fact that, or the amount that they might have thought they were getting before might be less because there's all this, they don't know what the salary cap's going to be. There's rumors it's going to go down and, so that's actually, Fred was just talking about that in a recent interview as well. So that's the only thing that I could see maybe playing into the factor you're saying, Jade. But in general, it's just too big of a drop off. I just don't see him. I mean, if he did it, great, more power to him, and we would love that. But I just don't see, I'm like a realist to the core. I don't see him doing that.
That right, Brent, I agree with you, Essie, because how could I not? I just argued for his value and then saying, okay, but take less than 10 million. There's no way that would work. I would tend to agree. I don't think he would take it.
Yeah. What also has has worked against him is the fact that the injuries, although like you said, we've seen what he can do and there's some areas where he's stronger than Serge, the injuries have also allowed us to see what we can do without him, right? So it's kind of like, well, we can win without you. So, that's unfortunate. It's what happens when players get injured. And you can even see that. I mean, when players would come back from injury, they would come back like they're in competition. Like when Fred would come back, when Norm would come, because they see what these players are doing when they get out, because we were playing so good, even like it was like next man up mentality, right? So it's unfortunate for him that he got injured so much, but he might be, because at the beginning of the season, most people were saying keep Marc instead of Serge, right?
Exactly.
So I think he's become a bit of a casualty of the injuries. And then also Serge was playing like he was, he's fighting for a contract, and it showed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I gotta ask this question though. How old is Serge really?
He's 31 in September.
I'm honing in on the word really because I know what I was implying.
Just, we don't know, right?
Well, I know what you're saying, but his play is showing that he's closer to his age than further from his age, if that makes sense.
Okay, fine. All right.
He's also single. He has less liabilities. He's like, so I think that.
He's got a kid though.
Yeah, but he lives a single life. Look at his COVID life. It's regimented.
Just to be clear, I won't be disappointed if Serge is the one that stays, because I actually do think Serge has been playing outstanding and I love him. But it seems like of the four of us, I will be the only one drinking an entire bottle of rosé by myself while watching Marc do the same thing when or if he is traded. And you guys can't tell me that you will not be sad if for some reason this season doesn't complete, COVID. If the season doesn't complete, you guys can't tell me you won't be sad that you won't see him in a Raptors uniform again if that happens.
Truthfully, as long as it doesn't affect Serge, yes. But if it were to have affected Serge, I would be upset with Marc staying.
Listen, I'm the person that doesn't miss DeMar. I'm not going to miss Marc.
Whoa!
Sounds like blasphemy.
I know.
You were one of the people that was like, bye.
Oh, yes, I was. I cannot stand a guy that won't work on his defense. I was a defensive player when I played basketball, and that made me crazy.
Fair enough.
Okay. So Jade, I feel like maybe introduction, we should call you Jade Heartless, who she's got no big deal. Bye. Get out.
Yeah, that would track.
Okay. Good to know. Okay, so let's move on then to our next segment. Sonali, we haven't had you with us for the last 2 weeks. It's great to have you back. And I'm thrilled to have you lead us through our tea time, Raptors tea time. What you got for us, girl?
Oh, okay. So tea. There's a lot of tea. Most notably, we're still thinking of Kawhi, and so one of the big sort of tea stories this week was the lawsuit that Kawhi had filed against Nike, specifically the Jordan brand. Against, I don't know if you guys saw it, but basically he drew a logo that was essentially, when you look at it, you think of him and it's his giant hands. And so he drew this in 2011, and Nike created a similar logo, and he filed a lawsuit and lost the lawsuit. Essentially what the judge said was that even though the K-Law or the claw logo was inspired by Kawhi's drawing, it was sufficiently different from what Kawhi had originally drawn. And so now it's sort of, people are speculating, is he going to appeal this decision? And so legally, what the sort of next step would be. He would appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal court. And his argument is basically going to be that it wasn't appropriate for the judge to dismiss the case, to dismiss his claim. And yeah, I mean, so I kind of thought about this and I was like, what was the real problem? Like, obviously the endorsements with Nike, he's still going to make a lot of money, but then he also has endorsements with like New Balance and a bunch of other companies. So the sort of impetus behind this is that if he can't license this to other endorsements like New Balance to all these other companies, then he's not going to make money off of this design. And so I don't think it's the last we'll hear about this. And I think his team actually will file an appeal. So it'll be interesting to see where this kind of gets. So yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of like the legal Kawhi claw like story still continues. And then I don't know.
Now we know why Uncle Dennis came on board, because Kawhi clearly wasn't reading his contracts back in the day.
I know.
The other thing I was thinking is, I'm wondering if his being in Toronto might have impacted it, because the Toronto players, more than any other team that I've noticed, have their own brands. And
yeah, that's a good point.
I wonder if had he not been in Toronto, it would have never maybe occurred to him to be like, this really was mine. And I feel like because Kawhi is such a chill guy, that he really does, he's not doing this frivolously. He really does feel like he has a claim on it.
Oh, for sure. And even like, you know, I pulled out a bit of his like statement, and he said, I came up with the idea of the incorporation of my initials in this logo. And he's like, you know, I drew up a rough draft, sent it over to the Jordan brand, and they completely changed it. And basically he's like, I want to give them the credit because I'm no artist at all, he said. They refined it and they made it look better than I thought it would ever be. And I'm extremely happy with the final version. So I think you're right, Jade. I think this isn't like a frivolous thing, but there's huge value in this logo. And if he has ownership over it, then he can basically sell it to anybody, right? So
yeah,
I think that just kind of shows the impact that Toronto had on him overall, because it reminds me of how New Balance had like no plans to release much of anything when he first signed with them. And suddenly they started, when they saw how big the market was and they saw how the fans were responding to him, they started releasing all this New Balance stuff that was originally not scheduled to happen. So I mean, it just shows maybe he also saw, you know, oh, my brand is changing, my market is growing, I need to get my stuff together so I can make money off this, and you know, release his own other or subcontract another line of merch with his claw or whatever, however he wants to do it. So I think that also shows how much that sort of change in his career happened. The fact that because he could have filed the lawsuit a while ago. You know what I mean? Because he was unhappy with the Jordan brand for a while.
And also with his injuries, though, like his leg problems are chronic. He's going to have that for the rest of his life. So he's also got to be thinking, how many more years do I have where my money is going to come from playing and not from the other stuff?
Yeah. So you know what that reminds me of too? From the moment I saw that he tried to trademark what it do, baby, or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, he is really taking his business to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
All the players, I don't know if you guys have noticed, on the Raptors, like all of them are always saying baby all the time. So I don't know why he thinks anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know we're going to talk about the MJ documentary in a bit, but like you also can't help but think about how stardom and how difficult it is now in sort of the arena of sports, with all of, like you guys said, like all of these brands like actually being like a superstar and having your own identity attached to it. It's a lot harder now than it seems like it was back in the 90s. Yeah, so I mean, other T, you know, Serge is still going strong with his, I think he's still in his first wave of performances for how talented are you? And so I, like many others, am quite bored and tuning into the contestants and seeing the talent and the special guests. And yeah, it's been pretty good. I mean, lots of interesting performers, and it'll be interesting to see as like Serge sort of, I think in one of our last episodes we talked about how he's sort of like the Simon Cowell of talent shows, and I think that Serge is still continuing. And yeah, I don't know, like, did any of you guys watch the latest Instagram live session with his How Talented Are You? I think it was yesterday or the day before.
No, I missed it.
Okay, nobody else saw it. Anyways, okay, so moving on. There's a cute little article in the Toronto Star this weekend as well too about Nick Nurse and his foundation that he created, the Nick Nurse Foundation, which coincidentally sort of launched on March 11th, which was the day that Rudy Gobert spread corona to the NBA. And he, you know, it's an interesting article because it talks about his passion for the game and for music. And he makes like a reference to this bebop jazz artist, Thelonious Monk. And he talks a little bit about how he's been using music at practices, and he's sort of been inspired by his artistry in music that sort of comes out in his playmaking as well too, which has been, yeah, it's sort of interesting to see that art. And again, like, I've just sort of gone into this kind of philosophical kind of thinking, because then you think about like The Last Dance and you think of Phil Jackson and like dynasties, and so, you know, it's just really, it's really neat to see how coaches do what they do. And so basically, yeah, his foundation provides an opportunity for youth to mesh ball, music, and educational opportunities. So lots of good stuff coming out of the Raptors. And then TikTok is just full of lots of awesome videos. I mean, Shea is going strong with his Tootsie Slide video. I don't know if anybody else has been on that train, but Drake dropped a new single called the Tootsie Slide, and it's become like a Tootsie Slide challenge on TikTok. And Giannis, you know, his relationship is going strong. He and his wife are partner. They're doing a lot of interesting, cute little videos on TikTok. And so, yeah, there's just so much out there, so much fodder for those of us that are deprived of basketball content.
Sonali, the way you so casually just said, the day that Rudy Gobert gave Corona to the NBA, I can't get over the way you just said that.
There's no other way. I think I'm at that point now where Corona is just like, you just have to casually slide it in. You can't give it that much credit anymore. So
it just sounded like literally Rudy Gobert came there and just like, you know, sprinkled it on every team in the whole league. Like, it just, I know what you meant, but it was just funny. That's all.
Well, I'm glad I can sprinkle some humor and some laughs from you, Essie. I know that many of our fans have been asking about like Essie's laugh. I know there's always like comments on distinguishing Sarah's laugh and Essie's laugh. So let's provide him lots of laughs today.
Okay, Sonali, thank you so much for spilling that tea, sharing it all with us. Let's move on to our next topic around the league. And you've already kind of touched on this. The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary, dropped this week. And the first 2 episodes were available on Netflix for Canadians on the Monday after the Sunday drop. So Essie right now is the only one who's actually seen the 3rd and the 4th episodes. We all have to wait until tomorrow to watch it. So we're only gonna cover episode 1 and 2. We're not gonna go into like great detail about it, but what do you all think? What were some of the highlights that stood out to you What was surprising? Yeah, what was surprising? That's the question I want to ask. Jade, go ahead.
The thing that was both most surprising and stood out to me the most, and I'm going to preface this by saying that I am about to re-earn my heartless nickname. That's going to stick, because I didn't realize Scottie Pippen was such a whiner. And he came across as so whiny and petulant and immature to me that it shocked me.
You don't think he deserved more money?
I'm not saying he didn't deserve more money. I'm saying he made a decision. I'm saying the ownership told him not to sign that deal, and he still signed it. The owner is the person in the best position if he signs a bad deal, and the owner still said don't sign it. So he made a decision that at the time he was happy with the money. He decided that this is what I need for my family. And then in hindsight, it's everybody else's fault that he wasn't making what he now thought he deserved. I'm not saying he didn't deserve more money. He probably did. But that was his agent's job. And he had the option to sign a shorter contract. 7 years was a long contract even at that time to be signing. He did what he felt like he needed to do for what his situation was at the time. And then in hindsight, when he's not happy with it, now it's the team's fault and it's everybody else's fault. But to me, it's like, you knew it was there. Somebody that you should have trusted said, don't sign it, and you still did.
I think it kind of is bringing up more of an ethical issue in terms of, yeah, he signed the contract, but at the same time, it's kind of like what happens with, and I realize I have a lot of these comparisons these days, but it reminds me of like when music artists sign a bad deal, because a lot of times they come from poverty or they come from a much less situation, and they sign that first record deal when, so many times they've seen people get cheated, but they still sign it out of desperation, or, maybe he was thinking, oh gosh, I need to lock in this money in case I get injured or something. So it kind of reminds me a little bit about that. And then, but in those situations, even with singers, people always still feel bad for the artist, even though technically they signed the contract, right? So
and I get that, but how many of the record label heads told them not to sign it? So that's the sticking part for me. The Bulls owner said, this is a bad deal, don't sign it. And he still signed it.
Yeah, but then I guess my sort of question too is like, you're in your like early mid-20s.
That's why he had
how
an
informed
agent.
Are you? And like
that's why he had an agent. That was the agent's job.
But this was like, it was the 80s, and a lot of times agents were just taking advantage of players, and
Yeah, but like an agent can only take advantage of a player based on how much they make. So it's in his best interest to get him as much money as possible.
No, but you never know. Maybe they took a kickback somewhere. Like this was the 80s, so things were a lot different. There's not as much, even now, there's not as much transparency as we would like to see with agents and players and the negotiations that happen. But I imagine back then, and I get this might be a bit before my time, but I imagine back then things were even more crooked than how they could potentially be now. So I could, like, even if he had an agent, I mean, that doesn't mean anything to me, because I just feel like, agents, league owners were taking advantage of players, for years. And it just, I think that just always happens when you have people coming from, like I mentioned, poverty or growing up in bad neighborhoods, and they just don't have the guidance to really help them understand the business.
But the owner who had the most to gain for him to be on a bad contract gave him the guidance.
So it's interesting, Jay, because basically you're saying this is like a failure by Scottie to advocate for himself in the first place. And to take the advice that was given by somebody, like in a purely business sense, you could say that Reisendorf, however you say his name, the owner, the best business decision would have been to keep his mouth shut. No, I get
about the contract. So that's kind of, for me, is like, sure, he was young, maybe his agent, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like the person who had the most to gain to take advantage of him made the effort not to.
I get your point, and I don't think it's wrong. I even think it's a good point. And what we could see is that the contract, it was signed the way it was signed at the beginning, and that's fine. And then it ended up being not a good contract, and the impact of it not being a good contract lasted over the course of that contract. Like, it soured relations between players and ownership, and management for years to come. And is it not also the best, like, in the interests of the owner to actually be willing to renegotiate it in the middle of the contract?
Well, the owner was already okay with letting Krause fire Phil Jackson. So, I mean, how much are you going to rely on him to keep that stuff in line if he's not going to keep Phil around?
Yeah.
When Michael Jordan said, I'm not playing for anyone else.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm pointing to, is it like it really was obvious to me, the divide between players and management and players and ownership, and how much could that divide have been bridged. And it's interesting because they were winning anyway, right? Yeah. Like, well,
and one of the parts about it too that people might not know is part of the reason that the contract ended up looking so bad is that the collective bargaining agreement was up in the course of that contract. So that's partially why the owner said, don't sign this long of a deal, because the bargaining agreement from the time they negotiate it ends at a certain year, and they have to negotiate it again. So at that time, because basketball was blowing up so much, the salaries absolutely skyrocketed, and that made it even more sour than it would have been otherwise if he had signed maybe when the agreement wasn't going to end until after his contract. So I don't know. I just feel like if you look at all the pieces, like if it was me in that situation, I'd be a little salty about it. But at the end of the day, it was my decision. And I don't feel like the world owes me for the decisions I make that don't work out in my best favor.
I see what you're saying. But unfortunately, players do this all the time. I mean, they sign contracts and then they come back midway and like, I want to be traded. So,
and I feel the same way about all of them, not just Scottie Pippen.
Yeah, I think I just feel bad in the sense that, like, knowing what his worth was, and I don't think he even realized what his worth was at the time and what he would turn out to be in terms of, being MJ's sidekick. Like, I don't think, like, when it's more in hindsight, when you see how valuable he was, it's like, oh, he should have been making more money. Come on. You know what I mean? But yeah, I see what you're saying.
Okay. So, Jade, I mean, interesting takes. Basically, you just think this is, you made your bed, sleep in it. That's just how this goes. And you've got next to no leeway on this. And you know what, I can kind of see that. Like, I don't know exactly why management would want to open it, except that it was souring the relationships. So maybe there was some business incentive to do it. Anyway, that was way back when. So last question I have for that. Did y'all think Michael Jordan was a bully to Jerry Krause? Or do you think Jerry Krause deserved how Michael Jordan treated him?
I don't think anybody inherently deserves to be bullied per se, but I also found Jerry Krause to just be really an unlikable person. So I don't think I could say he deserved it, because that kind of goes against my belief system, but I can understand why he would be a target.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you on that, Jade. And I actually, like, I've been sort of like pondering this whole, like, how much credit does Jerry Krause really deserve? Like, in the end, 6 titles in 8 years. I mean, he had something to do with that. And I don't know if it's sort of like this pandemic, like, need to, like, find villains. Like, Jerry Krause is like this villain. And then we've got, like, what's her name, Carol from the Tiger King and, Francesca from Too Hot to Handle. Like, it's just that climate right now where I think he's actually sort of, he's he's just a very unlikable character, and
he's an easy target.
And I mean, we do have to thank him now. Like, sports memes are back, which I've missed for a really long time. So
Essie, what are your thoughts?
So I will say that nothing in this documentary so far has changed my view of Michael Jordan. So I don't think he was a bully. I know that was a question that was raised before the documentary started. We talked about it last week that, could this, change his reputation, ruin his reputation? And so far, I'm not seeing anything that would lead me to dislike Michael. And if he was a bully, I would dislike him, right? So I don't see him as a bully at all.
Okay.
For all the people who are about to watch episodes 3 and 4, because I just finished watching it before we started recording, it is so good. So make sure you watch it because we're going to have a lot to talk about next week.
Oh, that's so exciting.
This documentary could not have dropped at a better time. I'm so happy they pushed up the release date so we can do
totally
this. Yeah. All right.
Have you guys heard how, like, apparently Kobe's last 2 years playing were filmed in a similar way, and they were released that in a similar style 20 years later, but now they're saying under the circumstances they might make it sooner. So that's
there's no way they're gonna wait 20 years now.
Oh, there's
no way.
No point. Like, it's might as well just bring it out now because we would love to see that.
All right, so there's drama in the 90s and there's drama now. We've got one final update on the Draymond Green versus Kevin Durant saga.
I wrote an article this week about Draymond Green, and it's probably a little bit of a different take because basically what I said is that I don't agree with everything that he says, but I like the fact that nobody is off limits for Draymond Green. And I kind of wrapped it up between all of my watching and then being on the podcast with you guys last week, kind of culminated in this article where I said, if every camp had somebody like Draymond Green, R. Kelly wouldn't have been able to get away with what he got away with. Me Too maybe wouldn't even have needed to happen, because to him, it doesn't matter that Michael Jordan and Kevin Durant have been put on a pedestal by society and by their peers. Everybody's open to criticism. And I kind of boiled it down into the idea that he understands that just because you're exceptional at something should not exempt you from criticism for everything.
Well, yeah, like I kind of like I guess I'm trying to understand what his motivation is. And so, like, when I was sort of digging around, like, I noticed that there's a book that just came out by this guy named Ethan Sherwood. It's called The Victory Machine, and it chronicles the rise and fall of Golden State Warriors dynasty and
I think
also
it's
Katie's
Ethan.
role.
I think it's Ethan Strauss.
Is it Ethan Strauss or Ethan Sherwood? Anyways, what are the Ethan. So I mean, the timeliness of it is kind of interesting. Like, is there a connection between that book and this? Like, I don't know, but again, we're also just like, we're just so famished for anything basketball related. So, like, Draymond has a platform right now, and he's like on this media circus, like he's on this train right now, which is kind of, it's just fun to watch.
I will say I do really admire the players who are more forthcoming and blunt about things than the ones who just like give these media trained answers all the time. And so it's kind of the reason why a part of me still likes Kevin Durant, even though he's, I guess you say he acts a fool sometimes, is just because he's so blunt and he just says things. And I think I really like that about Draymond. I mean, even though he said that thing about the Raptors having no chance.
I know.
same podcast episode, but I really admire that he just says things and tells the truth about what's happening. One thing that did stand out to me also was how he revealed the first season after they won with Kevin Durant, and how LeBron still got so much glory.
Yeah.
And he saw that shift in Kevin from that point on. I think that was a big revelation, and it really kind of helped us to see that this was a long, like Kevin Durant leaving was a long time coming type of thing. It wasn't something that was just, you know, after the incident. There was clearly a shift in him, you know, and by incident, I mean the Draymond versus Kevin one. There was clearly a shift in him from before that. So I thought that was a big revelation, how he took us through that story, and how, you know, the problems he had with how Steph and Clay were shooting and their shot selection and things like that. So, and he had, you know, we heard rumors that he had butted heads with Steve Kerr, and, you know, the fact that Draymond confirmed that was really interesting as well. So I think also Draymond's just tired of being made the bad guy too.
Mm-hmm.
Been made to look like he's the sole reason that, you know, Kevin Durant left, because that incident, because that's how it's, you know, people are making it seem like, when there is so much more to the story. And I think that's all that Draymond wanted to illustrate, is like, there's so much more to this than just, you know, him calling him, you know, that offensive word that we don't say on our podcast.
Sorry. And I was thinking about like the love languages when you were talking, Essie, and, you know, like obviously KD's love language has, in my opinion, is like words of affirmation, and he was always looking for that validation and that approval. And, you know, Golden State, like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, these were the like golden boys of the team, and he just never got that acceptance the way that you know, that sort of the star dumb that he, in many respects, like, you know, Allison said this in the last episode too, that he's a brilliant player, and he just never got that credit or that love in the same way that players like LeBron have gotten. And I can kind of see, like, I kind of feel that way as well too. And
see,
yeah.
when I look at him, I feel like he's kind of shooting himself in the foot when it comes to that, because he's thirsty in ways that Steph Curry and LeBron James never have been. And so that immediately gives you a feeling about him. Like, I wrote in that article that he is the epitome of a dude whose mom always said he could do no wrong, and he still believes it. So when the rest of the world doesn't validate that, it challenges his entire worldview. And then he reacts the way he reacts. Whereas with Steph and LeBron, he just always knew he was going to be it. He's known that since he was a child. And Steph's just so easygoing. He's just an easy person to like. It comes naturally. And because he's always looking for it, he misses it so much. You know, it's like that guy at the club who, you know, wanted to pick somebody up, and he's the last person you want to talk to. That's the feeling I get from KD all the time.
Oh my gosh. I feel like this made him seem like the girl no one wants, you know, in the dance at school or whatever. I'm still getting over the fact that you called him thirsty. But I do think, though, his expectations always seem to be off. And we kind of touched on it the last time we talk. Like, there's a reason why players like LeBron and Steph, you know, they get certain acclaim. They've put so much into their brand. So it's like, in one hand, Kevin Durant wants, you know, the glory, but in the other hand, he's saying, oh, I just want to play ball and that's it. Like, we've seen him say that. We've seen him turn away the media. Meanwhile, you see guys like Steph who are traveling to China and doing all these things for their brand and collaborating with other celebrities and all sorts of things. And then we all know what LeBron does. So it's like, that sort of stuff, it doesn't just come, you know, automatically. You got to work towards it. I will say, I do like the fact that he's, you know, during his injury time, he's been appearing on a lot more shows and media, but I don't know if that was just because he's bored and not because he's doing it for his brand. You know what I mean? So that stuff like that, it doesn't just fall in people's lap. It's kind of like the same reason why people love Russell Westbrook. You know what I mean? Because he's just got this like charisma and this like, you know, I don't want to say bad boy image, but it's like there's just something about Russell Westbrook that people like because he puts himself out there in a certain way. But I just don't think that, you know, Kevin, he's just, I don't know. It's like in one breath he's playing amazing, but then he seems shy in another breath. You know what I mean? It's like I just think there's so much more that goes into that sort of acclaim that he's looking for. And I feel like his expectations that he should just automatically get it based off. And I think you touched on this last week too, is how, you know, there's a likability factor as well. And, you know, turning media away and things like that, that makes them right. Like the more you turn them away and criticize them and don't want to answer and things like that, the more then they write, you know, bad articles about you. And they're not afraid to criticize you. You know what I mean? So he's got to work towards it too. It can't just be, you know, he automatically gets something just because he has a good game. That's not what it's all about. And it's never been about just the game.
Yeah, it's always about the relationships, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a business. It's a business at the end of the day. It's a business. It's about creating relationships. It's about building your brand. It's about putting yourself out there. It's about being likable. There's so many things that come into factor in addition to playing, you know, good basketball. Yeah. So to sum that up, I'm happy Draymond spilled the tea.
So you said you're happy that Draymond Green spilled the tea. You'll be like, okay, yes, it is good that Draymond spilled tea because Katie is thirsty so he can drink tea. That's final joke of this podcast, because we are going to wrap it up. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions, and thank you for our listeners for tuning in. Always happy to have you here. Tune in again next week. We've got some more Raptors ball coming your way. Make sure you follow us at Raptor Queens on Twitter, Buzzsprout, Apple, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram. And until next week, go Raptors, stay Raptors fans, and make sure you drink enough water so that you aren't thirsty this week either. Bye.
Bye.
Ah.